on the website for public viewing. Okay, Robert, just let us know when you've started recording. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, good morning, members and officers. Thank you for joining today's Governance and Scrutiny meeting. Okay, Lynn, do we have any apologies and call for the stem, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Councillor Jones.
Present.
Councillor Cogley. Present. Councillor Richardson.
Present.
We have an apology from Councillor Canning. Councillor Mabin.
Yeah, I'm present. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Here.
Councillor Lennox.
Yeah.
Councillor Kyle.
Present.
Councillor Hogg. Councillor Watts.
Present, Lynn.
And Councillor Stewart.
I'm here, thanks, Lynn.
And I'll call again for Councillor Hogg. Yep, thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Lynn. Okay, are there any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. In that case, we'll go into the previous minutes. Can we move as a correct minute? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Any matters arising from that minute? Nope. Nobody online? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the annual return on the Charter Annual Performance Report to Tenants 2023. That's pages 8 to 33 of your papers, and we have Helen Merriman, Housing Services Manager, to present the report. Okay, over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members and colleagues. The purpose of the report is to provide an update to committee with regard to the annual return on the Scottish Social Housing Charter submitted to the Scottish Housing Regulator in May 2023 and the annual performance report to tenants, which was published in October 2023. Recommendations are noted at paragraph 2 of the report. The outcomes and themes within the Scottish Social Housing Charter are stated at paragraph 4. Paragraphs 5 to 7 discuss the responsibility of Scottish social landlords to meet the Charter outcomes and standards, and that to monitor landlords' achievement of the outcomes and standards, the regulator requires landlords to complete an annual return on the Charter by May each year. Paragraphs 8 to 10 set out the timeline for submission of the Council's annual return in the Charter and the consultation and collaboration with representatives from the East Ayrshire Federation of Tenants and Residents and tenants' representatives prior to its submission to the regulator. In September 2023, the regulator published landlord reports for all social landlords, which provide information on 15 key indicators benchmarked against the Scottish average performance. Paragraphs 11 to 21 describe the key service areas and satisfaction indicators which were identified by tenants as being the information they wanted included in the annual performance report to tenants. And the East Ayrshire Federation of Tenants and Residents groups agreed the satisfaction indicators which would provide them with the required information so as to assess the effectiveness of East Ayrshire Council as a landlord. The last large-scale tenant satisfaction survey was undertaken in 2020 by a market research company on behalf of the Council, and the findings were reported to Cabinet in February 2021. The relevant satisfaction indicators pertaining to the survey formed part of the Council's annual return in the Charter submission in May 2023. And the next large-scale tenant satisfaction survey is currently underway, and the results will be reported to Cabinet this year. The findings of the survey overall were positive in relation to satisfaction with service delivery, with 91.9% of tenants very or fairly satisfied overall. You'll note the Council's performance against each satisfaction indicator from 2017-18 through to 2022-23, which overall is above the Scottish Local Authority average. 3 indicators have reduced since the last large-scale survey, and this may have been influenced by the restrictions in place at the time and the methodology used in the 2020 survey. However, as part of the Tenant Satisfaction Survey Action Plan of 2021 to 24 and the objectives contained therein, it is anticipated that in areas of reported reduced performance, the results will improve. The Council continues to work in partnership with the East Ayrshire Federation of Tenants and Residents and interested tenants to increase participation and engagement with the housing service through the implementation of the action plan agreed by a collaborative working group, as well as ongoing and future scrutiny exercises. Paragraphs 22 to 24 discuss performance in the housing quality and maintenance indicators. While the indicators have shown decline in performance, two continue to perform better than the Scottish Local Authority average across the same period, and actions have been implemented to improve service performance in areas where actions are required. The indicators relating to neighbourhood and community, access to housing and support, and getting good value from rents and service charges are set out in paragraphs 25 to 35 of the report. Actions to improve indicator 15 include the appointment of a team manager and additional resource within the antisocial behaviour team to review operational procedures and ensure a person-centred, proactive approach is taken to all neighbour complaints, as well as robust case management. Performance at indicator 17, which is the percentage of lettable houses that became vacant in the last year, has increased slightly to 8.7%. However, it is significantly lower than the 2017-18 figure of 11.5%. Our housing asset management framework process continues to assess and annually review a wide variety of measures to rationalise all our stock, helping to improve this indicator, and additional improvement activities that are underway include tenant-led scrutiny groups and a review of the void business unit. The implementation of the void business unit aims to streamline the void process, reduce the time that properties are vacant and the subsequent rent loss. We note a deteriorating quality of the homes returned to the void business unit following tenancy termination, and a number of factors may be impacting on tenants' ability to sustain their tenancies. Therefore, we continue to work with our key partners to further develop initiatives to reduce the number of terminations and provide tenants with ongoing support to mitigate the cost of living and mental health challenges to those most in need. Within indicator 22, there is a reduction for the period 2017-18 through to 2022-23 in the number of court actions initiated. This is in part due to the implementation of COVID-19 legislation in 2020. And although legislative restrictions have eased, there has been a continued reduction in the number of court actions raised from 677 in the financial year 2017-18 to 72 in 2022-23. And the number of evictions decreased from 82 to 12 in the same period. Revised rent recovery procedures are in place to assist tenants to maximise their income and reduce financial insecurity, and include a partnership approach with support services and the promotion of the Tenant Support Fund. The rent collected and gross rent arrears, both as a percentage of total rent due, are favourable compared to the Scottish average. Performance in relation to void rent loss has improved, with a decrease in the percentage of rent lost through properties being empty during the last year. Our regeneration strategy linked to the housing asset management framework has shown significant improvements in letting long-term voids, with numerous positive impacts felt by communities when these properties are relet. And in 2022-23, 89.9% of void properties were relet in under 16 weeks. Paragraphs 36 to 38 discuss the annual performance report to tenants, which was issued in October 2023 and meets the Scottish Housing Regulator requirements. The East Ayrshire Federation of Tenants and Residents, along with the Tenants and Residents groups, agreed the key areas and indicators which were included in the report and used to assess the effectiveness of East Ayrshire Council as a landlord. The Federation is involved in performance monitoring of both housing and housing asset services through their attendance and involvement and input at performance meetings, and through the development of the tenant scrutiny subgroups, which aim to review our processes, make recommendations for improvement, and highlight areas of good practice. The preparation and submission of the annual return in the Charter and annual performance report to tenants support the Scottish Government's Housing to 2040 vision and the guiding principles of the East Ayrshire Community Plan and delivery plans and the Council's strategic plan. Both the annual return on the Charter and annual performance report to tenants meet the requirements of the Scottish Housing Regulators Framework, Scottish Social Housing Charter, and the requirements as set out in the Housing Scotland Act 2010. There are no human resource implications, and as part of the local housing strategy assessment, there are no negative impacts on equality groups as a result of the returns. The preparation and submission of the annual report in the Charter and annual performance report to tenants will have a positive impact on low income, low wealth and material deprivation through the contribution made by the provision of good quality and energy efficient council housing on local economies, promoting vibrant town centres and communities. There are no direct financial implications. All expenditure in relation to the production and distribution of the annual report to tenants is met from current budgets. The annual return in the Charter and annual performance report to tenants contribute to the Council's community planning themes of safer communities and wellbeing. There are no net zero implications. To conclude, both the annual report on the Charter and annual performance report to tenants meet the requirements of the Scottish Housing Regulator. The annual performance report to tenants provides robust information to allow for a good understanding of how East Ayrshire Council is performing as a landlord and facilitates better scrutiny of landlord activities by tenants and residents. The performance information contained in the report shows a positive trend, with the majority of indicators showing improvement or that the Council is operating at a similar level to previous years. Work is now underway to prepare for the annual return on the Charter submission and the new annual assurance statement for 2023-24, and we will liaise with the regulator and provide key quarterly performance information with regular monitoring and reporting of indicators through the Council's electronic performance management system. That concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Helen. It's a good report. It's got a lot of information contained within it. Lots of information. I'm sure there'll be questions from the floor. Who has questions? Councillor Cogley?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Helen, thank you very much for your report. There are three areas that I'd like to ask questions about. The satisfaction survey, table 7, what is the cost of indicator 18, and then the process that we go through when we're reletting properties. So shall I ask the question in turn and let you answer? I'm just trying to work out what's the easiest way to do it.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay. So in terms of the satisfaction survey, the last was done in 2021, and the next has just been done, and we're waiting for that to be reported back to us. So presumably that will be the basis of this discussion this time next year. So I'd just like you to confirm that. And then in terms of the number of responses, I wonder if you could just give us a bit of information about that. I think it's about 10% that we're looking for, which does to me seem to be quite low. While I respect that's in line with what we're expected to do, I think it's something we should discuss. So Helen, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. First of all, yes, the new survey results will be reported at the next meeting. In terms of the response rate, the regulator does provide guidance with the number of responses that they look for. And for this survey, we have aimed for a sample size of 10% return on our tenants. Our current tenants are currently just approximately 11,500. The Scottish Housing Regulator states within their publications on their website that for landlords with 7,500 units or more, that they look for a minimum of 376 responses for that number. So we do consider that 10% is appropriate for this survey.
Thank you, Helen, for that. And the number of responses, is that chosen at random, or do we have some influence over how they're selected? Thank you.
It's part of the, sorry, through you, Chair, it's part of the procurement exercise when we go out looking for a market research company to undertake the exercise. We stipulate within the contract that we will be looking for 10% return of our tenants. And it's a broad selection of our tenants. So we do stipulate that there is a geographical spread, and we look for our demographics to be represented just across the survey results.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for that. And then my next question relates to table 7. Indicator 18 shows the percentage of rent loss due to properties being empty. And I can see the percentages there. Now, the percentage figures look very, very low. But just in terms of actual pounds, what does that cost us? So, for example, 22-23 is 1.28%. Below the Scottish local authority average. But what is that actually in pounds, please?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair, I don't have the figure to hand, but if you could possibly pause for a couple of minutes, then I could retrieve that figure for you.
Thanks, Helen. Blair, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, Chair, if you don't mind, I actually think I've got the figure fairly handy. I think the figure is round about £600,000, but if you give me just 1 minute, I'll just confirm it exactly what that is.
That is in the report somewhere. I know that I picked that up somewhere. So I think it is around the 600k mark.
Round about the 600,000 figure is the figure we reported at November's Cabinet for the suite of housing papers that we presented. So we'll be within a couple of pounds of that, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Blair.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's the answer that I was looking for. Thank you very much for that. And then my third question is a sort of more general question. When we're looking at reletting a property, and you've indicated that some of the properties have been returned in not too good a state, but as a general point, what is if you could tell us, please, what is the process that we go through to turn the property round so that it's available for reletting as quickly as possible? If you could tell us what that is, please, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. Upon receipt of termination of tenancy, we engage with all outgoing tenants to discuss the reason that they're looking to terminate their tenancy, see if there's anything that we can do to help them stay in the property. However, if tenants are moving on to alternative accommodation, or if their circumstances have changed, then we'll work with them and advise them with regards to their obligations within their tenancy agreement, which is to keep the property clean and tidy, and if terminating, to clear the property and remove their goods. However, we have noted that there is an increasing number of tenants who either are struggling with the funds to move and clear the property or make the appropriate arrangements. So we have, through our neighbourhood coaches and our colleagues at the Void Business Unit, a real focus on working with these tenants to identify at an early stage if they need assistance to clear their properties. Following that, once we receive the keys, we carry out the repairs that are required. So we will make sure that the property then meets the lettable standard prior to allocation. If there is the option to, then we'll carry out any housing improvement works while the property is void. We'll make sure that the property is clean, of a good decorative order, that all the fixtures and fittings are operational, and then we will seek to invite the selected applicant to view the property. And that's an accompanied viewing with a council officer to have a look around the house, possibly garden, communal areas, give advice on the services within the property. And then from there, if the applicant decides to accept the offer, arrangements will be made to then sign the tenancy agreement and make the necessary arrangements around rental payments and any application or update to Universal Credit. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Helen. And just to confirm then, so before any viewings are allowed, we make sure that the property is of a lettable standard?
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cogley. Thanks, Helen. I'm going to bring in Councillor Stewart, and then I've got a couple of questions. Okay.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks for the report. And I think you might have answered my question, but I'll just I'll go for it again. So the customer satisfaction survey, you're saying that's 10%. how many, can we work out how many people for the kind of south side of the authority would be contacted, kind of pro rata, and have we got members for the south side on the federation?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. The results of the survey are due, so we will have details of all the addresses and all the households that took part in the survey, so that information will be available to us, but it was important that there was a spread across all communities in East Ayrshire. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure of the members from the south of the authority who will be active in the executive committee, because membership has changed quite a lot in the last few months, but certainly it's something that I'll look into and I'll get back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I'd just like to know that obviously there's a proportion of people for this area being involved in some of the decision making. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Councillor Stewart. Helen, see if I just take you back to table 6 and indicator 17. So the percentage of lettable houses that became vacant in the last year had risen slightly to 8.7%. Now, not so long ago, there was a report to this committee from our corporate fraud team where it was reported that they had recovered abandonments. So obviously that would have increased the vacancies. And within that report, it described the state of some of the properties when we finally got them back and the cost that was. So just in terms of that 8.7%, and I think the abandonments was something just over 100 properties. So that 8.7% that became vacant 22-23, I know we've got 12,027 properties. So 8.7%, how many properties were empty from our properties? And I'll ask the next question, if that's okay. Indicator 30 on page 17, average length of time taken to re-let properties in the last year, which was 58.6 days. And when I go into the Scottish Housing Regulator website to compare against our neighbouring authorities, and I'll just compare against North Ayrshire because they have approximately the same number of houses of us. I think it's 1,000 more, but they took 24 days to turn around a property. And actually from 1819, there were 19, just under 20 days. During COVID, it was 26, 27 days, but then it started to fall, 22 days, and then it's up to 24. Now we're almost double that. In fact, we're over double that. So I'm just thinking, why is it taking us so long when we have less properties? And I know that there'll be different reasons. I'm just trying to understand why a neighbouring authority with slightly more houses than us can turn around their houses, their vacant properties in half the time or under half the time.
Thank you, Chair. Your first point with regards to the number of voids, we've approximately 900 voids in the financial year. Properties obviously void for different time periods and for different reasons. For that first figure that you referred to, the 8.7%, and that's the percentage of lettable houses that became vacant, that will include all empty properties, but also where our existing tenants are moving to new build properties as well. So there's a whole mixture of reasons, either people moving for aspirational reasons or because they're moving on to council properties, or new builds from our search partners too. So you will see within that table that while it is increasing since 2020-21, and probably it took the dip due to COVID when the restrictions were in place and not as many people were moving house, but it is an area that we are focusing on to reduce the number of voids that we have for any reason and to sustain tenancies across the authority. With regards to the time to re-let, we have worked quite closely with North Ayrshire Council because we do note that their void re-let times are less. However, we have a real emphasis on the quality of properties that we re-let, and we have a very high lettable standard. and that's because we do not think that it's in the tenant's best interest to move into a house where there's a lot of new tenant work required, and quality and tenant satisfaction is very important for us, so that when tenants move in, they're not having to take the time to report further repairs. Across local authorities, when we have looked at void standards, we do consider that the quality of our properties is high in comparison to some local authorities who will simply carry out necessary checks and then get tenants in and carry out the work subsequently thereafter.
Okay, Councillor Richardson. And then
Thanks,
Councillor
Chair.
Maben.
Thanks, Lily. It's just a couple of wee points. Blair mentioned 600,000. The actual figure for 2022-2023 is quoted in the papers. It's page 16.33. And Blair was very, very close. You're only £3,262 out, Blair. So the actual figure was £603,262. But the main point I wanted to come in on was Helen's point about the relatable, letting the properties again after they've been void, and the fact that we prepare them to a really good standard before the new tenant moves in. Probably I can back that up by saying I've had at least a couple of housing inquiries from tenants in the same street that there's been a void property, because obviously what they notice is all of the work that gets done to a void property before it's relet, and they might have had, shall we say, requests in for repairs for similar type work, and then as a local councillor, you get the email coming in saying, how come I'm not getting my work done? Because I think I've maybe sent these to you, Blair. So you know that these cases have happened, because what the tenants in the properties that are in the street notice is all the work that's been done to the void property, and then you as a councillor get the email saying, why can I not get my repairs done at number 24 when you've done all that work at number 12? So just to back Helen's point up, I think we do make sure that when it's a void property before the new tenant goes in, that it's in ship-shape condition.
Thanks, Councillor Richardson. Councillor Maben.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just interested in representation. The Taras, I think there's only about 6 active that I know of, and they seem to be pretty small groups. I don't have a Tenants and Residents Association in Kilmarnock South active, or I would be going to the meetings and meeting these people. So I'm wondering how representative the input is. We're aiming at 10% returns, and we're not getting that. Page 21 shows you the report, and it says that the council owns and manages around 12,000 homes, and the survey had 669 responses, which is about 5.5%. So we're not getting anywhere near 10%. I'm interested in where the survey, these 669 responses, are coming from. Are they only coming from areas where we have these 6 small Taras active, or are they coming from all over East Ayrshire? Thank you.
Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Councillor Maben. Through you, Chair. We do have 6 active tenants and residents organisations at the current time. They are in Newton, area of Kilmarnock, Gilfoot in New Milnes, Hurlford, which covers the whole of Hurlford, Townhead and Campbell Street in New Milnes, Gateside and Gauckland East, 2 groups in Galston. We have noted that during and since COVID, the number of groups declined. A number of reasons. Restrictions in place meant that face-to-face meetings couldn't take place, and for many members of groups, they didn't have the IT equipment or the knowledge on how to facilitate meetings and really keep them going and keep the momentum of groups. Also personal circumstances, and people have fallen away from groups, so there has been a loss of key members, which meant that some groups were unable to sustain their activities. However, the Federation are working with local people and engaging with various existing groups within communities, to try and set up new groups in Shortleys and Riccarton, in Catrin, Onthank and the Davidale area of Stewarton, and they are ongoing attempts to re-establish the Keir Hardy Hill group in Cumnock. So the Federation are also liaising with Ayrshire College to increase engagement and participation with young tenants and students. They're also working with the British Legion to increase engagement with our veterans and other groups, which include ESOL, which is English for speakers of other languages, and other disability groups which use centre stage within Kilmarnock. So that ongoing work continues through conversations that they're having in communities, information days, attendance at gala days, social media and digital promotion as well. With regards to the response for the survey, it was conducted in the summer of 2020, summer and autumn, so COVID restrictions were in place and the survey was undertaken by telephone, similar to other local authorities which carried out surveys at that time. We do note the response rate, however, it is more than the Scottish Housing Regulator states is required, so we were content with the level at that time. However, we are aiming for that 10%, and I have been assured that we've completed the 10%. And that work is ongoing with the preparation of the results back to us. I have seen the local authorities that we benchmark with, how they all vary between return response rates of between 3.9% and 10% within their satisfaction surveys. It's a large scale survey. It requires to be undertaken every 3 years. So while that one was in 2020 and this one has just completed, and then the next one will be in 2026. So I hope that answers your question, but certainly all details with regards to the respondents will be provided back to us, so we will be able to demonstrate the geographical spread of the responses so that it's representative of the communities across the local authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. That would be very interesting, and I hope they're successful and they manage to set something up in Riccarton and Shortleys. I'm also a member of British Legion, so I'll be interested in being involved with those groups if they do manage to set up successfully. Thank you.
That's Councillor Mayburn. Helen, can I just take you to page 11, indicator 5? So percentage of tenants satisfied with opportunities given to them to participate in the landlord's decision-making process, 76.4%. And since we kind of started recording, we've fallen from 85.5. But again, from the Scottish Housing Regulator site, we're more than 10% away from our neighbouring authorities. South Ayrshire is 95.6% and North Ayrshire is 91.9%. So what is it they're doing that we know if they're able to, give opportunities to tenants to help them in the decision-making processes?
Thank you, Chair. The figure of 76.4%, that was the figure that was returned during that large-scale survey in 2020 when perhaps people were isolated at the time due to the COVID restrictions. So unfortunately, that's the figure that has remained for the following years. However, it was noted, 76.4%, that there was room for improvement. So as a result, the actions to increase participation and engagement opportunities are contained within the action plan, which is an appendix to this report, whereby a group was formed, a multi-agency group, including the Federation, worked together to develop the action plan and set out, you'll see a big list of actions and initiatives for increasing participation engagement from all our tenants. So that included a range of activities with regards to the information that we as a council provide to our tenants through the annual performance report, the consultation that we carry out with tenants, for example, the most recent consultation being the rent setting consultation that has just concluded, but also the opportunities that are available for tenants and residents to be involved either through the Federation or by setting up a group or simply just being involved in the decisions that we make as a service.
And I know the effort that's been put in to reach as many tenants as possible, but even still, it's pretty low. But it's people's choice. It's people's choice, and I think a lot of the things are done digitally, you know, social media, and there's still quite a lot of residents out there that just refuse to engage in that way, and they prefer face-to-face, and that's not always been possible. I get that. But I've just got another one actually. So see, in terms of the action plans, page 26, objective 1.2, and that's everybody's bugbear. It's all councillors ever hear about. The dog fouling and the fly tipping in the communities. I think we've got a long way to go to eradicate that, to be honest with you. And I think the messaging and the effort that we put out from the council, from all our partner agencies, I think, you know, we have stepped up, and it's just behaviour. It's behaviour not just of our tenants, but residents of East Ayrshire. And I really don't know how we can, other than enforcement and being absolutely going down that enforcement line, how we, you know, we improving that. Fly tipping, I know that when communities or residents or tenants contact me about fly tipping, it can take a wee while for it to get removed, and that sometimes, you know, just makes things worse, because by the time you go back, the pile's been increased, you know, and that's a huge issue. So what other initiatives do you think that we can do to help improve those situations within our communities?
Thank you, Chair. Our neighbourhood coaches work very closely with other services, be it greener or cleaner communities. In addition, they work closely with enforcement officers, environmental health, joint visits. We also carry out estate walkabouts, multi-agency walkabouts. So that would be with colleagues from environmental health, from vibrant communities, greener communities, Police Scotland as well, and be visible within communities. Our antisocial behaviour team, they're out with our neighbourhood coaches, carrying out visits and inspections, a whole range of activities that are underway, just to really try and push that positive message of keeping communities clean. So it's ongoing work, councillor, just to make sure that people are visible in communities and be able to spread that message about keeping the open spaces, particularly paths, footways, just clear of waste and mess.
Thanks, Helen. I've just got one final question in terms of rent arrears. So rent arrears, is that across all of our tenants, those who are benefit claimants as well as those who are working and pay full rent? Is it across the board? Do we see more and more working people falling into rent arrears? People who are claiming benefits, to have the option to have that element deducted from their benefit to be paid straight into the council. I mean, is there still a lot of uptake in that, or is more and more people choosing not to do it? And, you know,
rent arrears it's across the board for either tenants who pay full rent, due to pay full rent, or for tenants that are perhaps on full or partial universal credit. We also have the move to universal credit of legacy benefits as well, which can incur rent arrears during that transition period. But there is a range of support that's available for tenants, either through our neighbourhood coaches, universal credit support team, financial inclusion team. We have our tenant support fund. We have in-court advice as well. There's a full range of support that's available for tenants. But absolutely, anybody can fall into rent arrears for any reason, either through a reduction in their working hours, through losing their employment, switching from one benefit to another. So it's something that our system and our processes is absolutely tailored to take account of, and there's lots of support that's available for tenants at any stage through falling into rent arrears.
And just for somebody going through the universal credit application process who then falls into arrears, when that application is then being assessed, are the arrears cleared off? Joe, that might be a question for you. That might not be.
Somebody on universal credit, if they have arrears while they're on universal credit, they can either they can apply for what's called a third-party deduction, whereby it's an amount that's calculated and would come straight to the landlord. They can also apply for what's called a managed payment, so they either have the option to pay the rental amount through their housing cost to ourselves as landlord, or they can apply to have that payment made direct. But in addition to that, there is the third-party deduction, and that's where it's a suitable repayment plan that's made, which also makes sure that the tenant has sufficient funds for their other living costs.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. It was just a point. It's basically a general point. I think you mentioned, Lillian, there that a lot of people don't like to deal online. They like to see somebody face to face. I was just going to, I know this goes out to the public. I mean, I was really impressed by the Tenants and Residents annual conference, which was held in one of our schools recently. And I'm going to say, was it held at the Grange? St Joseph's. Can't even remember what school I was in. But it was a great day because it was well attended by members of the public. Obviously, East Ayrshire have a hand in putting it on as well. But one of the great things about that day was the breakout sessions. And I went to two, so you basically got away to classrooms with members of the public. And one of the best presentations, there were two ladies there that day from our financial team. And they did, you know, if somebody who went along that day and just maybe had financial problems but didn't want to make it public, I think there's maybe about 15 people in the classroom. But listen, I learned a lot from listening to those two ladies that day. So that's a brilliant event for somebody who wants to, maybe at the end of that, maybe take one of the ladies aside and have a wee quiet word with them and, you know, set up an appointment. So I definitely recommend the Tenants and Residents conference for somebody that likes to deal with people face to face. I know it's only once a year, but that's a great event. The other breakout session was Stephen Shirky from Blair's team. And I learned a lot about how you can actually stop dampness and condensation in your house in that session. So that's a brilliant day for, just when you mentioned there, Lillian, members of the public that want to see somebody face to face or learn about an issue to do with their property. I definitely, and I know that Davy Leggett at the Tenants and Residents Association is doing everything he can to get our tenants to engage with the Federation and make that annual event bigger and better every year. So there is good stuff happening out there when East Ayrshire and the Federation are trying to get in touch with tenants and get them involved, basically.
Sorry, I've got one final point, and it was regarding the Scottish Housing Regulator website. When I went on to have a wee look, it says that it's engaging with East Ayrshire Council in relation to services for people who are homeless and the unsuitable accommodation order. Can you just elaborate on that for us, please, Blair or Helen? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The regulator in 22-23 reviewed and looked at the data for all Scottish local authorities from the return on the statistics which we provide on a quarterly basis, and also the annual return on the Charter. So the regulator is speaking to all Scottish local authorities, not just East Ayrshire, regarding homelessness, to look at the risks to people who are threatened with or experiencing homelessness, and really focusing on the provision of temporary accommodation. So on the 5th of December last year, two of our colleagues from the regulator came to East Ayrshire and met with ourselves to talk through our response to homeless presentations and also about our portfolio of temporary accommodation and the actions that we're taking to move people into settled accommodation as quickly as possible. They commended our rapid rehousing transition plan and the actions that are contained within it. We also conducted a study visit with them and took them to St Andrew's Court. They were very happy with St Andrew's Court. It's recently undergone refurbishment, and they were very happy to see that it is an environment which is trauma informed and a welcoming environment, and they are looking to return to us with a practice worth sharing. They have informed us that we have no additional tasks to undertake and that they are happy with the performance within housing options and what we are doing as a council to eradicate homelessness. Also, you mentioned the unsuitable accommodation order. East Ayrshire Council has never breached the order. We do not use hotels or bed and breakfast accommodation to house homeless households, and they're always provided with suitable accommodation either within St Andrew's Court or through our portfolio of furnished accommodation.
Thanks, Helen. Does anybody else have any other questions? No, it's always good to finish in a positive. So with that, can we agree the recommendations on page 8? Yes? Yep, okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Blair, thanks, Helen.
Thank you.
So we'll go over to review of Councillors' Code of Conduct decisions and over to the Chief Governance Officer. This is a favourite of David's.
I'm sure it's a favourite of yours and the members as well, Chair. We bring this report, as you know, Chair members, on an annual basis. We bring it on the back of the annual report from the Standards Commissioner. That takes a while for them to publish, so their report for the 22-23 year was only published in November. There's two aspects to it. One is the high-level overview of the business they conduct, the width and the depth, the volume, types of complaints, how they deal with them and the progress they make in dealing with them in their respective roles. And then you have elements of jurisprudence there in terms of, in the appendices, different range of decisions that have and outcomes that have been reached through the investigation of other complaints. In terms of the report, it sets out there the original origins in terms of the Ethical Standards in Public Life Act 2000. The Act came in 2000. I think the code came in 2003 because it was the Act that required the Scottish Ministers to issue the code. You've got a wee bit of the evolution there at 3 and 4 on the role of the Commissioner. They've obviously stayed in one place too long. They started as the Chief Investigating Officer. They moved through the Public Standards Commissioner and are now the Ethical Standards, or the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life, having also subsumed the roles of Parliamentary Standards Commissioner and the Public Appointments Commissioner. So there's now 3 for 1 in that particular role. In terms of the respective roles, the Commissioner is effectively the fiscal or akin to the fiscal. They receive complaints or reports of alleged offences, or in this context, breaches of the code. They arrange and have them investigated. They form an initial view on them and effectively decide whether or not there has been an offence. And if there has, they would then present that to the Commission, who fulfil effectively the function of the court. It's not as formal as that, but that's the best analogy. They receive those cases, they arrange hearings as appropriate, or may choose not to, and you'll see a bit of that in a minute, and they issue their judgments. In recent years, there's been a wee bit of tension. There's been a number of commissioners, so I'm not naming anyone in particular, but at one point there was a bit of a tension, because if you actually look at the width and depth of the code and all the roles it covers, not just 32 councils, but all those other external bodies, joint boards, etc., 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 other public bodies, and as I highlighted, the other aspects in terms of those other 2 roles that came to the Commissioner, both the Commissioner and the Commission have quite a lot on their plate. They're not a massive organisation, either the Commissioner's Office or the Commission, and they are sitting at quite a substantial backlog at the moment, and I'm talking years, I think, rather than months, in terms of progressing these. And at one point, around about 2021, the then Commissioner, and I think that's key, the then Commissioner decided to take their own approach to trying to reduce the backlog by effectively having a gatekeeping arrangement whereby they tried to fill it out, any non-complaints or other matters, and put them to one side on the basis they didn't need to be progressed. That's set out further because the tension was reflected in the directions that are mentioned at 9. So it is still the case, as set out in paragraph 6, that 5, sorry, that the Commissioner will always report the outcome of all their investigations to the Commission. But previously, as set out in para 9 of the report on page 35, there was a point where the Commission issued a formal direction actually requiring the Commissioner to investigate all complaints. And that's different from that initial sifting gatekeeping of, is this going to actually turn into, is it likely to translate into a finding of an offence? So bottom line was the Commissioner was sorting out the flotsam and the jetsam, the wheat from the chaff, and the Commission weren't necessarily cited in that, and were also uncomfortable that things might be getting dealt with on a lighter touch basis. So they required that all cases be investigated for a period of time, which at that time has now contributed to the ongoing backlog because it slows everything down because there is a formal investigation process. And as you will appreciate, it takes a bit of time to do everything while crossing the T's, dotting the I's and preparing the formal statements and reading everything, the rights and all the rest of it. So the outcome of all of that is that the current Commissioner is not obliged by that direction that flew off in August 23, not obliged by that direction to can absolutely investigate every case, but they do still need to report. However, it's only been, I wouldn't say diluted, the threshold's only been reduced slightly, and now it's wearing the face of it. So if a complaint comes in and it's within 12 months of the alleged incident, and on the face of it there is a breach of the applicable code, then they do require to investigate rather than require to investigate absolutely everything. So there's a more of a balance now, and hopefully that will see the system being less clogged in the future once the backlog has been addressed. Another change in terms of the format of the oversight element of the report is set out in para 8. So they used to break down complaints against councillors at the council to complaints against councillors in all these other roles and other outside bodies. Now they just report it all en bloc, so you don't have that differentiation in any comparison with previous years. For anyone that was interested in the split, is no longer there. So that's the kind of big picture in terms of how they operate themselves. Interestingly, you'll see page 36, paragraph 10, we have the outcome in terms of the 22-23 year of the cases, and I think it's quite telling that the highest number of complaints, as you'll see there at the bottom of that, is that a bar chart? Turn it sideways for it to be a bar chart. At the bottom of that chart was disrespect towards employees or members of the public. Which might be quite surprising, but there you go. I think what's also quite telling is the second biggest group of complaints to me are non-complaints. When you read the small print, which I'm struggling to do by my sight, but you'll see there that out with jurisdiction, which is the second biggest group, are actually complaints which, following assessment, do not fall within the remit of the Code of Conduct. They are distinct from complaints out with the jurisdiction of the Commissioner's office, such as a complaint about Councillor England. So I'll go back to what I said about, can they fill it any out? Do they need to investigate? If somebody comes in and mistakenly says, I'm complaining about Councillor Smith in England, then you wouldn't need to investigate. You say, sorry, he's in England, nothing to do with us. If somebody comes in and says, I'm complaining about a councillor, it might need to be investigated to find that whatever the complaint is, the councillor wasn't acting as a councillor. You know, if somebody comes up and annoys or insults you or your spouse in the pub, and you've done everything you can and it's nothing to do with being a councillor, they've just taken against you and you have to take whatever action you have to take as a member of the public, then they wouldn't automatically, not everything you do in private life translates into your role as a councillor. So sometimes there needs to be an investigation of the facts to establish that it's still not a breach of the code, even if it otherwise had been, for instance, you know, a complaint against the Scottish councillor, but not actually a valid complaint. So that's the 3 tiers, out with or completely out with their jurisdiction. They don't need to investigate. If they feel that having investigated it, there is no relevant part of the code that's been offended, then they're now recorded as out with jurisdiction.
You've got more detailed information, which I won't go through, in the statistics of what they've gone through, but I do think that what's quite telling is when you get to paragraph 15. So bear in mind all the rigmarole of you really have to investigate everything, you really have to tell us about everything, and then you read in paragraph 15 that of the 9 cases referred to the Standards Commission in that year, they held hearings in 5 of them and took no proceedings in another 4. So there you go. And then a further 36 reports where they found that there was no breach. So an awful lot of this activity is actually generating decisions on the other side of the jurisprudence as to where they find there's no breach, rather than a smaller number of occasions where they find there's a breach. But when you read the two together, it still gives every elected member in Scotland that insight as to what the current thinking is in terms of the interpretation of the code. And the code itself never stands still. It's always under review. There's always repackaging, reformatting. There's always additional elements. There's revised guidance. So it's always been kept up to speed to reflect trends and practices in chambers around the land. What we have also produced here, as we do with the report each time, is in the 3 appendices details of the different cases that have been dealt with. They're broken down, I think, just in terms of the timeline as to did they arise in 21-22, did they get resolved in 22-23, did they arise and resolve in 22-23, etc., etc. So the detail is there. I'm not going to pick any out because then I run the risk that if I highlight, because you don't have obviously the attributed party for any of these, but that will be known. So I'm not picking any out in case I look like I'm picking in one particular party or suggesting by picking a particular case that that's a problem here. The point of bringing this here is to let this committee particularly have a think and a reflection on what is happening elsewhere. Because I will say again, without tempting fate, that our average is 1 complaint every 5-year term against all of our councillors. That's where we've been for the last few terms. Other councillors, as you'll see from these stats, are near 1 a week. So we must be doing something right, and whatever it is, I would commend it to all of you members that we just carry on as we are, and it should hold us in good stead. But part of that is keeping ourselves as officers and members informed of what they're doing elsewhere that's drawing the attention of the Commission, and particularly where the Commission are finding people in breach and applying appropriate sanctions. And while there aren't many that get serious, there have been the odd case that's led right up to suspension and everything that goes with that. The conclusions there in terms of some of the high level stats, all I would say in conclusion is, as I said a moment ago, we should just, I think, carry on as we are. And as members, I would simply encourage you and all members at all times to continue to be mindful of the code, to have regard to the code, to refresh your memory of the code and read it through or check it up. If you've got a particular issue, the code's your first port of call, and officers would be your second port of call if you don't find the answer you're looking for within the code itself. We are absolutely here to help and support. We're not here to judge. We're here to interpret the code and give our best advice as to how you keep yourselves on the right side of that. I've said before that I think, certainly for quasi-judicial committees like planning and licensing, the politics should be left at the door. I think one view is for a committee like this, a scrutiny committee, it's probably the same is true. If you're only looking at matters as a scrutiny committee through a particular prism, be it coloured red, blue, green and yellow, black and yellow, then you will only see things in those colours, and you're better to have that whole spectrum of colour and see everything in the round if we are to fulfil our duty for effective scrutiny and try and help the council genuinely identify where things could possibly be done better or more efficiently, effectively, etc., and to come to a view in the best interest of the council. Beyond that, but more broadly, the best advice is always remember at all times you are elected members. You're here to represent your communities, not yourself or personal interests. You're not here to make yourself look good or your colleagues look good. You're not here to make your political opponents look bad. Your duty as a councillor is as set out in the code. It's to support the council, basically delivering the best services it can and the best decisions it can. And I know the members of this committee know that, but that applies to all 32. This isn't just for the benefit. We would all members have sight of this report, and you don't need to wait for the annual report. You can also dip into the Commissioner's website at any time. they do also produce regular reports and updates, and I'll need to get a bit better at circulating them, but and we'll put arrangements in place for that going forward, but they're not telling you anything that we don't tell you as your officers and advisors. So at that, Chair, I'll stop just now. If there's any particular queries or questions on any of these, I'm not saying none of this applies to us. That's where complacency would creep in, and complacency can be a risk. What I'm saying is, as me as a council have, I think, the best track record in Scotland for complaints or not complaints to the Commissioner, and I'm sure we would all wish to keep it that way, and anything we can do as members or officers to keep that level of standard of conduct here in what are increasingly difficult and challenging times, admittedly, is only to the good. So I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thanks very much, David. Yep, my advice would be always keep a copy of the Council's Code of Conduct at hand. And if anybody's got any questions or issues, then seek advice from the monitoring officer. Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. I'll follow David's advice. I'll not mention the particular case, but it's a general question that came out of reading these cases, and this is where we probably need your legal advice, David. So there's a paragraph in one of the cases that reads, "The panel accepted the councillor was entitled to the enhanced right to freedom of expression under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights afforded to politicians commenting on matters of public interest." So I'm reading that and thinking, I didn't even. So basically, as councillors on a matter of public interest, say we're online and we make a comment, what can we say, David, that an ordinary member of the public couldn't? What's the difference between being a local councillor, which, let's face it, it's the lowest rung of politician? What can we say on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, that an ordinary member of the public couldn't?
I'm not going to get into a shopping list of these, do's and don'ts, acceptable language, not acceptable language. There's been a trend in the jurisprudence by the Commission in dealing with these cases. If anybody's free to go and look, and you look at some of them and you see what the allegations are in terms of how someone's meant to have spoken to someone else, and it's about interpreting the different bits of the code. If you've got a bit of the code that says you can't, be excessively critical of people, and this was getting played out, I can't remember the other day, but it's the difference between, in fact, somebody come in the door, we'll get that out to members that just come in the other day. It's the difference between challenging a proposal, challenging an officer on presenting a report or a recommendation you don't agree with, and you can voice that opposition. That's what the role is. That's what I stressed earlier. As politicians, you are here to make sure that we are fulfilling the best value duty, the efficient, effective and economic use of resources duties, that every proposal coming forward ticks all the other boxes, represents value for money and supports the ambition to deliver the best possible services, etc., etc. And bottom line is therefore that it's how you express that opposition, and what they do is cut a wee bit more leeway, particularly if it's councillors on councillors in the chamber in that debate. So sometimes, I'm not, as I say, I can't specify particular language, but sometimes they seem to cut a bit more slack because it's in the context of, if you're berating somebody in the car park as an employee because they took your car parking space, you're going to be in breach of the code. There's a wee bit more leeway if you're in here and you're not so much berating them because that's about conduct, but you are effectively challenging and holding people to account and saying, just as was done there for the last 40 odd minutes in the housing paper, and rightly so, that is that effective scrutiny. But it also needs to be applied at Cabinet and Council when members are making decisions. So what might not be acceptable on a one-to-one is a bit more leeway, because if you're actually engaging in political matters and your argument is, okay, I maybe got a bit excited, but I was entitled to challenge that. I was entitled to question the officer's facts and figures and what he was telling us because I actually didn't think he was right. Then it's getting the balance between a legitimate and effective challenge and just being rude or abusive or aggressive to people. And that's the difference. My own view is they bend almost backwards in some of these cases. And you look at what was said and you're saying, in what world? But there are cases where they've cut a lot more slack than I might have expected, or anyone might have expected in reading the cases. But where the subject matter, I think that's what I'm trying to say, is where the subject matter is absolutely relevant. It's not just how you conduct yourself, it's within what context, and where it's in the chamber and it's in that political context, and it is looking at, as I say, effective challenge or engagement on decision making or scrutiny around decision making, then they do allow a little bit more leeway than they might in other situations. There's so many cases, it's really hard to try and bring all that into one succinct summary, and without ducking that one any further, probably the best thing to do is have a look at a number of those cases where the right to political expression has been cited. Some you think, well, that's fine, I'd agree with that once you see, because you just see the high level allegations, and when you get into the detail and that full context, sometimes you think, well, that's fair enough, and sometimes you think, no, you know, they must have nearly snapped their back trying to get round that one. So that's just my view, but they're the Commission, and who are we to question their judgment?
No, that's fine, David. I was actually surprised that that exists, because I just think in this country everybody should have the right of freedom of speech. So I was a bit surprised to see that as a lowly local councillor we are afforded maybe more leeway than an ordinary member of the public, and I'm not quite sure that that's right, to be honest, but I just thought I would ask the question.
I think I don't think it's a greater right. I think it's the interpretation of that fundamental right, because for most of us as citizens, that only gets put to the test if we find ourselves in a criminal court because we've turned up at a protest and hit the wrong policeman or said the wrong thing or whatever. So it's absolutely a fundamental human right, and it's not that councillors have an enhanced right, it's how the two interact, and it's the Commission's interpretation of, there's the code, is it a breach? And then it almost is another level of, is it an acceptable breach? If it's not a breach, end of story. Is it a breach? There's now another layer of, is it an acceptable breach because it was in that context of a political debate? So they're not given a higher standard. It's how they interpret the two to get to an outcome. And my own opinion, for what it's worth, is there's one or two there, and I haven't looked at them for a wee while, so I can't cite them, but there's one or two there where you kind of think, you know, it could have certainly gone the other way. So it is a matter of interpretation, and it's applying what is that legislation there against what is a statutory code there, and making the two fit. And there's no exact science in any case. That's why you have a commission with the function of hearing it and making those decisions. But I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks very much. Does anybody have any other questions for David? Online? No. No. Okay. So can we agree the recommendations on page 34? Lovely. Thank you. Now over to the International Financial Reporting Standards 16 leasing paper, and that's Joe. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members and colleagues. This report relates to a new accounting standard, which are not normally brought to your committee. However, the changes in this standard relate to leases, and while the technical accounting arrangements can be put in place fairly easily, the new standard will see major procedural changes to internal processes within the Council, and therefore it is important that the report is considered by members today. In summary, the report looks at three main areas: the reason for the change in accounting treatment of leases, the change in the definition of leases, and the change in lease procedures for East Ayrshire. The report begins by noting that all councils in the UK are required to adopt the new IFRS 16 standard as at the 1st of April of this year. And as you would expect, significant preparatory work has been taking place over the last year to ensure that we are able to adopt the standard and introduce the new processes that will accompany it. Under the existing accounting standard, which was called IAS 17, leases could be held on or off the balance sheet, with some leases charged as a revenue expense and others as a capital expense. Having the ability to apply two different accounting approaches led to inconsistencies, a lack of transparency, and heightened the risk of misapplication or misinterpretation. For example, excuse me, in the airline industry, prior to the implementation of IFRS 16, it was common practice for airline companies not to actually own any planes or include them on their balance sheet. The aircraft were financed through off-balance sheet lease models. This resulted in some entities overstating their net worth whilst not disclosing the substantial lease liabilities that they were obligated to pay. So the new standard will simplify this process, bringing consistency and transparency and result in all leases now being recorded and held in the balance sheet. The lease will be shown as an asset with an accompanying liability or obligation to pay the lease costs over the duration of the lease. So each lease creates a debt liability over the life of the lease. To bring about that consistency, the new standard widens the scope and introduces a new definition of a lease, which is a contract that conveys the right to control the use of an identified asset for a period of time. The important thing here is that the new definition does not contain the word lease, and instead makes it clear that a lease can arise wherever an entity enters into a contract with a third party, with the entity being able to use the third party's asset for a period of time. This much wider definition means that with the support of colleagues in procurement and elsewhere across the Council, from April, we will need to know when a service enters into such arrangements so that we can examine the contract and identify whether a lease or a lease-like arrangement will occur. To ensure that we can do this effectively, I have presented the report to CMT and asked services to provide me with details of contracts that might be covered by the new standard and the wider definition, so that we can have these logged and included in the opening balances for the Council's annual accounts. To support the introduction of the new standard and bring about that consistency and transparency, I have also prepared an updated accounting policy bulletin, which is attached to this report as Appendix 1. This new APB will be completed following feedback from relevant colleagues across the Council and will become live and authorised for use by Chief Financial Officer and Head of Finance and ICT, to my left, yeah. The Council's Treasury Advisors have also provided specific support to the Council, and I have provided a copy of this report to our external auditors so that they are aware of the progress we have made and our readiness for the 1st of April go-live date. Finally, members, it is rather an unusual report to come to you today. However, given that leases and contracts within the public sector, given the leases and contracts that the public sector and councils enter into, it was felt appropriate that this report was brought before you so that you can understand the new processes that will take place from the 1st of April and so that you can be assured of the preparatory work that has been taking place ready for this go-live date. And I'm happy to stop there and take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much. How are we getting on? How's our departments getting on? Are you getting plenty of work from them?
Sorry, I thought you meant me. Hi, Maggie. My heart's racing. We're having a good response. The largest area of our leases is in vehicles at the moment that we're looking into. So good, just working closely with the strategic lead for transport and getting all the information that we require for that.
And we're confident that we'll be ready and good to go for the beginning of April.
Quietly confident. Yes, we will be. It's an awful lot of work to get through, but yeah, we will be there.
Okay, thanks very much. Do we have any questions online?
No, none.
No? Okay. So can we agree the recommendations? Yep, thank you very much. Well, thank you. Well done. Thank you very much. And it's the next one's the awarding of contracts period from 25th of August 23 to 11th of January 24. And that's over to you, David. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Members. Again, as you know, you're familiar with this. This is one of the regular reports, and as I take the time to explain each time, our arrangements in terms of the scheme of delegation are such, as you know, that where we tender contracts through any of the recognised procurement options, be it a full competitive tender, direct award off existing frameworks, etc. As long as we follow one of the designated routes, then the authority to sign off contracts, provided the budget is signed off by the head of service, etc., and everything else is lined up, then the authority sits with me. So we're not a council that routinely brings reports to Cabinet for approval of contracts. And there's a simple reason for that, and it doesn't just apply here. To my mind, it applies anywhere, because if you follow the due process and if you have what they call the preferred bidder at the end of that, you have a given outcome. If you bring that given outcome on a routine basis to decision makers and say you need to approve that and they don't like it,
and you say we still need to approve it because you can't go to second because that would breach the law and will be challenged, then it will always routinely beg the question of, well, why is it here if we're simply having to approve it? And I'm not saying rubber stamp it. So that's the explanation for where the authority sits. And obviously with procurement, with legal, etc., all within governance, I'm in a position to be satisfied and work with Joe on the finance side and heads of service that all the elements that need to be in place. So have we got approval, or is it under delegation? Have we got an approved budget? Has the head of service signed off before we then formally enter into the contract, which contracts solicitors and procurement will have had a hand in? So it all comes together neatly. But the downside of that is then members recognised a few years ago is that there is no open, transparent, there's no visibility on any of that activity other than some of the reports we put up in terms of the annual procurement plan and the annual procurement performance report to this committee. So that led to developing at the request of this committee before. I think it was the corporate governance committee, and was it the previous title? Wasn't that? It was the corporate governance committee and the governance scrutiny committee. That was back in 2006. They said, well, the halfway house is let's achieve that openness, transparency by having regular reports on all the work that's done under delegated authority to let people see. And some of them obviously are contracts that are signed, haven't been approved by cabinet. So this is one of those reports that has always been improved upon over time. So we now record, was it cabinet, was it delegated authority, and folk can see the connections between decisions being taken and how that was taken forward and at what cost and with whom. In terms of that openness and transparency, what we're showing is the route we took, the open approach, the competitive opportunities that were there, those who took them, those who were successful, those who were unsuccessful, and the rationale for the award. As another more recent improvement, we've also started recording the community benefits that can be derived, not from every contract. You really need to look at the nature and value of the contract, but where it's appropriate, where people will actually be in your area, providing services, engaging your communities, then we do engage procurement, work closely, as members are well aware now, with the defibrillator, and that's easy for me to say, the defibrillator initiative, but that's kind of getting to an end point. There's only so many listed buildings we can stick them on, so they're now broadening that out. The procurement manager, Leslie McLean's working with Mark Hunter in particular around support to community larders, and that's in the form of these packs to help people. Obviously the best way to help people in the cost of living crisis is not to give them money per se as much as access to good fresh raw ingredients and the means to prepare healthy balanced meals for themselves, which literally can include the means to cook, as well as support, I suppose, in training, but the actual means to cook, because some people need that as well. So you'll see here recorded now that we're moving away from some of the defibs and some of the relevant contracts. We're getting contributions to that by way of air fryers, etc., etc. We can't take money off developers and buy food or buy other kitchen implements or other things that would help communities. It has to be in the form of tangible gifts, etc., or not gifts, but products. We cannot take money from developers. So we're working to expand that original approach from the defibrillators into these other areas. You'll see a lot in ARA contracts where it's focusing around the active travel awards, and there is that connectivity, wrong word for active travel and the green, whatever, but the connectivity between ARA contracts being let to deliver things like active travel routes and cycles, etc., being provided to folk in the communities there. And you'll also see a number where we are moving, as I say, towards asking people to contribute to these packs that we then put out to the community larders for distribution to those most in need within the communities. So hopefully, that gives members some assurance there that we are trying to maximise and capture the benefits that we can, recognising that the willingness of a contractor to offer benefits is relevant, but can never be the determining factor to the award of the contract, because we have all other matters such as the cost and the quality, if quality was part of the valuation. So in broad terms, that's the contracts we've let in the period covered by the report. Again, I won't pick any out particularly, but if members have any questions or queries in any of them, I'll try and answer them, or at least come back with the answer when I can.
Thanks, David. I'm always interested to see the community benefits, defibrillators, as you've mentioned, the kind of ladders, the air fryers and stuff, that's really good. But there's also one here, where a tender wasn't asked for community benefits, but they were asked as part of the process to commit to fair work practices and living wage requirements. It's always good to have that in black and white. So, I mean, it's really, really good. Does anybody else have any questions, points, Councillor Richardson?
Just one question. It doesn't relate to a contract that's here, but it does relate to contracts and suppliers. I'm not going to mention the names of any firms or anything, but it was a case, still it's an ongoing case, constituents case, and it relates to the provision of stair lifts. And basically what I was going to ask maybe Joe and David was, see in East Ayrshire Council, where we have one preferred supplier, and if the department that's wanting to purchase the service decides that they want to use another supplier other than our preferred supplier, they've got to go to procurement and get basically permission to do so. Who decides within East Ayrshire Council that for that particular type of service we should only have one preferred supplier? Because for me, and again, it goes back to this discussion we've had before at other presentations and what have you about the public sector trying to get best value or value for money for every pound we spend. For me, it should always be a sort of situation where when East Ayrshire Council wants to purchase a service, you're asking 3, 4 or 5 suppliers to actually put a bid in. So you're basically asking the private sector to compete for the business. And it doesn't make any sense to me to have different types of service where we've decided that we're just going to one company all the time. Because that one company, once they know they're the preferred supplier, really aren't they competing against anybody? So it's just, so my question would be, who decides that we're going to only have one preferred supplier in any particular area? And why would we do that?
Short answer is the client service. The client service decides their needs, because the whole procurement cycle, and it's a cycle, but if you want to take a starting point, it's the commodity strategy. So procurement provide advice and support to the client service. The client service is asked to produce their commodity strategy with our support and think through and work through for themselves. What do their clients need? How do we need to arrange that? What's best fit? And then there's many options as to how we get them one or more suppliers, depending on what fits at an operational level. But we don't sit at the centre and tell people what they're getting. We help them work up their commodity strategy by which they identify what they need us to procure for them. So there's no situation in this council where any service is being imposed from the centre as to what they can and can't have, because it's built into the tender approach. The options start with a full open competitive tender, and that might be 50 companies invited to bid, 10 might bid, and the commodity strategy will have determined before we start, because it needs to go into the tender document, are we appointing one successful bidder? So you've all bid, we've got your competition, the financial evaluation tells us you're cheapest, the quality evaluation tells us you are a certain place in the performance, you might also be the best quality evaluation, but over the piece, you take the 2 bits, procurement work out the financial evaluation, because that's just an arithmetical exercise from the tenders. We have an evaluation process involving the client service at which they sit down and evaluate the quality elements. The 2 come together in a tender report to me, outlining if the commodity strategy says it's one sole supplier, that's what we'll appoint. If the commodity strategy says we need 4 suppliers and create then a wee mini framework, that's what we'll provide. In relation to the stair lifts, which is I think where you started, there was a 2-year review carried out by a former internal audit colleague working closely with the client service before we put the current arrangements in place, and they were signed off at Cabinet. In terms of the arrangements we've put in, we have, I know because we've just had to informally extend the stair lift contract for a few months because there's a bit more work to be done. It's due for re-tendering, and they're now looking to split some of that and put some of the work through existing frameworks, so that expedites it, and leave some of the work to the next tender. So it has been revisited again, but it was a complete review and overhaul. The output of that was put through the decision-making processes, and we implemented that strategy, and that one was actually signed off at Cabinet. But at the end of the day, it was one supplying the stair lifts,
but that was what we were asked to procure rather than what they were told they could have.
Okay, anybody have any points or questions? No, in that case, can we agree the recommendation on page 69? Thank you very much. Thank you all for your attendance and your contributions today. Thank you all. Thank you.